I'm now pleased to outline for the members of this House the details of the legislative changes proposed. What I'm about to say is, of course, a summary only, and members wishing the precise technical details should refer to Bill 24 itself. As this House will know, from late January to late March, I conducted what was probably the largest financial consultation in the province's history. The back-to-balance consultation included no less than 19 separate public meetings and a dozen other meetings with organizations like Chambers of Commerce. There is more than one way back to balance, Mr. Speaker, and we wanted to give Nova Scotians a say in which path they wanted their government to choose. This budget embodies much of what we heard during that consultation process. Among other things, Nova Scotians told us that 3 to 5 years was the right time to get back to balance. They also told us that they expect their government to identify and eliminate waste, duplication, and inefficiency. And that's why the largest part of the $1.4 billion gap that we need to close will come on the expenditure side of the ledger. Mr. Speaker, $1.1 billion of the $1.4 billion gap will be on the expenditure side of the ledger. But those changes, although they require a great deal of planning and hard work, do not require statutory amendment, and so they are not included in this Financial Measures Act, and I'll say no more about them today. Nova Scotians accept that it is not possible, not reasonably possible, not responsibly possible to eliminate the structural deficit and return to balance entirely on the expenditure side. Considering that almost $7 billion of our $9 billion budget goes to health, education, and community services, with another $1 billion going to interest on the debt, there are limits to how far and how fast cuts or inefficiencies can be found and expenditures restrained. We take very seriously our obligation to provide quality programs and services to the people of this province. And that is why at least some of the gap is being closed on the revenue side. Mr. Speaker, to be sure, no one likes to see increased taxes. If you ask Nova Scotians, including me, if they would like to pay more taxes, most, if not all, would say no. We do understand that. However, Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that the province doesn't have the ability to adjust some of the largest sources of revenue, such as equalization and other transfer payments from Ottawa, or royalties from natural gas production. And if we are going to continue to provide quality programs and services, particularly in health, education, community services, and transportation, then consideration must be given to changes on the revenue side. Our expert advisory panel recommended that we increase the HST by 2 percentage points and that we seek more revenue from the highest income earners. Those options were discussed throughout the back-to-balance consultations. And those options, which we adopt with some modifications, form part of this Financial Measures Act. In fact, an increase in the HST was the most commonly recommended measure in the back-to-balance dialogues. Most people told us that they thought they could live with the HST being returned to 15%, which is, after all, Mr. Speaker, the level it was at for 9 of the last 13 years, as long as it came with measures to eliminate or reduce the impact of the increase on those with low and modest incomes. Although the HST increase is not itself in this Financial Measures Act, the Act does provide for the recognition of a new tax coordination agreement with the federal government that will provide for the HST increase. The new agreement will also provide for point-of-sale rebates on children's clothing and footwear, on feminine hygiene products, and on diapers. Those measures, which are a very important part of our plan, will appear in regulations to the Sales Tax Act and are also not specifically mentioned in the Financial Measures Act. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, the Financial Measures Act amends the Income Tax Act to provide the authority to make regulations to introduce 2 other tax credits. First, the Affordable Living Tax Credit, designed expressly to help make life better for Nova Scotians with low and modest incomes, and the Poverty Reduction Credit, which will provide tax-free payments to help about 15,000 low-income Nova Scotians, many of whom have disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the Act also contains another measure to make life more affordable for seniors in Nova Scotia. In addition to the Affordable Living Tax Credit, any senior whose income is low enough to receive the federal Guaranteed Income Supplement will no longer have to pay any provincial income tax. This measure will put about $12.5 million in the hands of low-income seniors. And Mr. Speaker, although I hesitate to do so because all measures are measures of the government as a whole, I do have to point out to the House that this measure, this particular measure, was a personal initiative of the Premier. Mr. Speaker, during the Back to Balance sessions, I often heard the suggestion that at least some of the deficit gap could be closed by increasing the income tax of those with the highest incomes. This reflects a sense that people who can afford it can reasonably be asked to contribute a bit more. The Financial Measures Act therefore amends the Income Tax Act to introduce a fifth tax bracket for those with taxable income over $150,000. This is an explicitly temporary measure designed to help bring the province back to balance and will expire after a balanced budget is introduced. Mr. Speaker, this government is also introducing a number of measures to promote and support Nova Scotia businesses, including our very important small business sector. As described in Clause 7 of this Financial Measures Act, the rate of corporate income tax for small businesses will be reduced from 5% to 4.5% effective January 1st, 2011. Eligible businesses can apply this rate on the first $400,000 of taxable income. This is the first time there has been a reduction in the small business tax rate since at least 1992. Previous governments had the opportunity to do it, but did not. Mr. Speaker, our government is also proceeding in this budget with a number of other tax changes that were enabled by financial measures legislation in previous years. These measures include a decrease in the large corporations' capital tax and an increase in the basic personal exemption. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the issue of the Public Service Pension Plan, and the bulk of this year's Financial Measures Act is taken up with amendments to that plan. Our government recognizes the value of the people who currently provide and have provided the services and programs Nova Scotians rely on from their government every single day. That is why we offer a competitive pension benefit package to more than 30,000 current and retired public servants who belong to the Public Service Superannuation Plan. However, Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the pension plan is not healthy. It is not in good condition. It is very seriously underfunded. At December 31st, 2009, the pension plan is estimated to be at 69% funding. That funding level is projected to decline to 30% over the next 3 decades if nothing is done. To put it another way, Mr. Speaker, today the plan's assets are $1.5 billion short of covering the existing liability. And the interest alone on this deficit is more than $100 million per year. This is not a situation that can continue. Every year that we do nothing, the problem gets worse, and the solution becomes more difficult and more expensive. The time to act to restore the public service pension plan to health is now. This problem has been developing over a number of years. It is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that the plan has some of the most generous benefits in Canada, many of which were defined when most citizens didn't live as long as they do now. It is also a fact, Mr. Speaker, that 2,000 employees working in the Nova Scotia Public Service today can retire right now if they choose to, and another 4,000 will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years. The number of retired members in the plan continues to increase. For every 10 active members contributing to the plan, there are 7 pensioners receiving benefits, and this ratio is only going to go up. Aside from these structural issues, the recent turmoil in financial markets has caused a significant drop in the value of the plan's assets. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, we need to make changes to the pension plan's finances now, or the plan's funding levels will continue to deteriorate to dangerously low levels. As Minister of Finance, I am the sole trustee of the Public Service Superannuation Plan. The trustee has an obligation to ensure the plan can meet its obligations now and in the future. It is a responsibility that I take very, very seriously. As Minister of Finance, I must also ensure that the cost of the Public Service Pension Plan is affordable for the people of the province, not only today, but in the future. Today, the province, that is to say, the people of the province, already bear the cost of employer contributions plus additional annual costs arising from the plan's unfunded liability. These pension valuation costs were approximately $150 million in 2009 and are forecast to keep growing if no action is taken. Mr. Speaker, there are some who say that we should just leave the plan alone and allow the plan to return to health solely through investment returns. But, Mr. Speaker, expert advisors advise me that it is very unlikely that investment returns alone can restore the plan to health. It could happen only if investment returns quite a bit above historical norms could be sustained over a very extended period. And this would ultimately require increasing the risk levels for the plan's underlying investments. As trustee, I cannot responsibly follow a path that is more risky and more likely to fail than to succeed. That is why this Financial Measures Act contains a number of amendments to the Public Service Superannuation Act. Our plan for pension reform is balanced and fair to everyone while restoring the plan to health and security for the long term. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, everyone is contributing to the solution. We do recognize that every member of the plan will be affected in some way. However, at the same time, no one group of plan members is treated preferentially, and everyone benefits from a plan that is healthy and secure far into the future. Mr. Speaker, I will now review some of the measures that have been taken and that will be taken to restore the Public Service Pension Plan to health and security for the long term. As this House will recall, we amended the Public Service Superannuation Act last year to implement a 13.5% contribution rate increase effective in July 2009. Employees now contribute somewhere between 8% and 11% of each paycheck to their pension plan, depending on salary level. This amount is matched by the employer. Current employees are therefore already paying higher contribution rates than ever before. The key measure in this Financial Measures Act is a provision that will tie future annual cost of living adjustments to the health of the plan, operating on 5-year cycles. During the first 5-year cycle, from now through 2015, the annual indexing is guaranteed at 1.25% each year. The 5 years of guaranteed indexing will provide today's pensioners and employees soon to retire with a level of certainty about how much they can expect to receive each month. And I note in passing, Mr. Speaker, that the annual increase this year was 0. And so a guarantee of 1.25% each year for the next 5 years provides a certainty that should be helpful to pensioners. After the end of the first 5-year cycle, the amount of the annual indexing adjustment will be tied to the health of the plan. And for each 5-year cycle thereafter, if the plan is funded at better than 100%, then the trustee or trustees can allocate the assets above 100% to annual increases for pensioners or to a strategic reserve or both. Let me say plainly that it is this government's intention that the future trustee or trustees should allocate all or most of the surplus to provide the maximum level of annual indexing consistent with the health of the plan. We do not, however, Mr. Speaker, want to forestall completely the possibility of a strategic reserve, something from which all current and retired members of the plan may benefit. If at the end of each 5-year cycle the plan is funded at less than 100%, then the law will provide for an automatic contribution increase sufficient to return the plan to 100% funding unless the trustee or trustees are able to devise an alternative plan that has the effect of also returning the plan to 100% funding. Either way, Mr. Speaker, these amendments are intended to ensure that the pension fund will be maintained at or near 100% funding for each 5-year cycle. We cannot responsibly continue the current situation where full inflation indexing is provided regardless of the health of the plan and regardless of the cost to the taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, other changes are also being made to certain pension benefits. These changes apply only to members of the plan who were first employed on or after April the 6th, 2010. These changes will have no application to current retirees or to current active members of the plan. These changes, too, are reasonable and will keep plan benefits competitive so that our civil service can continue to attract highly qualified candidates. In addition to the changes I have noted so far, the government is undertaking a refinancing of a substantial portion of the unfunded liability. Before I move on, I would like to reiterate the importance of treating current and retired members of the plan equally. I have already referred to the difficult demographics of the plan, particularly the fact that a large number of current members are already eligible to retire, and a larger number will soon be eligible to retire. The changes to the pension plan have been carefully calibrated to ensure that we do not create a wave of unintended immediate retirements caused solely by changes to pension rules. That could happen, and indeed is likely to happen, if we treat retired members more favorably than active members. There is now no reason for any active member to accelerate their retirement date because of the proposed changes. The so-called Rule of 80 and survivor benefits remain the same for all active members. All active members of the plan should make the retirement decision that is right for them. In summary, Mr. Speaker, all of these changes to which I have referred, namely last year's increase in contribution rates, contingent indexing, slight reductions in some benefits for future employees, and refinancing of a portion of the unfunded liability, are designed to return the public service pension plan to full funding and then to keep it there. These changes to the plan are necessary, and they are also reasonable, responsible, balanced, and fair. Everyone is contributing something, and everyone, absolutely everyone, will benefit from a plan that is healthy and secure for the long term. Amendments to the Public Service Superannuation Act will also enable the introduction of a new form of trusteeship in future. The proposal embodied in this Financial Measures Act is that rather than have one individual, namely the Minister of Finance, as the sole trustee of the plan will move to joint trusteeship. The new Board of Trustees will represent the interests of all plan members and employers and will have fiduciary responsibility for the health and security of the plan. We believe that joint trusteeship better reflects the best and most modern governance practices for a large pension fund. Our intention is that the joint trustees will be carefully selected based on their relevant competencies and professional experience that will enable them to make the best decisions for the plan. In the coming year, we will reach out to plan stakeholders to develop the appropriate joint trustee structure and all aspects of the plan's governance. This will include determining how trustees are selected and how decisions about the plan are made. We do not have a predetermined answer to what joint trusteeship of the Public Service Pension Plan will look like, nor is it possible to predict the time frame in which it might occur. Any joint trusteeship will have to be done by formal agreement and will be subject to the approval of the Governor and Council. Sole trusteeship will continue until that formal agreement and that approval have been achieved. If and when this transition is made, the province may assume a different level of responsibility for future financial obligations in support of the plan. We believe this model has the potential for a stronger and more modern form of governance with transparent decision-making and professional oversight and broad accountability for the health, stability, and management of the plan. Mr. Speaker, the changes to indexing and survivor benefits in the Public Service Plan will also be applied to the pension plan for members of this Legislative Assembly. The Financial Measures Act amends the Members' Retiring Allowances Act to that effect. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this Financial Measures Act provides the authority for amendments to the Public Service Act that will clarify the relationship between the Public Service Commission and Workers' Compensation Board. Repealing this section of the Act underlines the fact that the Workers' Compensation Board is not part of the government reporting entity. Mr. Speaker, with that, I move second reading of Bill 24, the Financial Measures 2010 Act. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and pleased to rise today and speak about the FMA, the Financial Measures Act, and of course it's interwoven with the budget and brings to light perhaps what are key announcements in this year's budget. The Minister of Finance talks about the greatest consultation process on record, but it must be pointed out that it was in fact a very directed process. When you went to those forums, you were presented with 4 guiding questions only, charts that supported the direction that government was planning to go, were very, very much part of that process. And really, it was one formula presented in 19 different communities. And also, perhaps the best part of it was that it allowed for submissions. However, we don't know much perhaps about the nature of some of those submissions, because I had 3 of those in my office. 3 people, in fact, who had attended the session in Kentville. 3 people who had attended the session in Kentville. 3 business people who found the process very constraining, very narrow, and not really able to put forth a wide range of other possibilities that they saw in terms of how the Minister of Finance and this government could conduct the finances of the province, make some of the desirable changes, because there is no question we have to make changes in Nova Scotia. And we know that, you know, what the minister and government has brought forward is one approach. And the main approach at this point is to generate additional revenue. And that additional revenue will come from the 2% HST. So they're using that as opposed to, in the first year of government, make some of the tough decisions that were required around expenditures. And we know that those will be needed even in conjunction with the HST. And so it will be of interest as to how those are made known, how they develop over the next 3 to 4 years. You know, there is the reduction of 1,000 civil servants, and again, we will see where those cuts and changes will come, and whether or not true efficiencies will be built in to the way the civil service carries out the business of the province. One of the connections, of course, to the HST, which is brought forward in the Financial Measures Act, is dealing with the rate of taxation between 93,000 and 150,000. The minister, in his remarks, talked about shifting some of the burden, you know, to the high-income earner. Well, I think the Nova Scotians that I represent, and most MLAs in this House, represent a strong percentage of middle-class incomes. Those incomes between, you know, 30 and 75,000. Let's use that as a figure. So that's the group that are going to pick up the burden of the 2% HST increase. And in fact, what the minister fails to point out in his Financial Measures Act is that those income earners between 93,000 and 150,000, actually it goes beyond 150,000 up to about 214,000, will actually get a tax break. You know, at first light and look at this particular budget and at the document when we were in lockup, my first reaction is, you know, the minister has overlooked. You know, the finance department haven't crunched all of the numbers to in fact show what is happening here with the changes that are coming into place. And so we now have a situation where there is no break for that 34,000 to 93,000 income earner in Nova Scotia. They will bear the burden of this budget and most likely many budgets to come forth. In fact, this will be, again, one of those, I guess, cornerstone pieces of how this government is formulating a 4-year plan, and that will return to the electors of Nova Scotia at some time in the future. This will be one of the decisions long remembered. And the likelihood over the next 3 to 4 years of an additional 2% coming from the federal government is very, very real. And Nova Scotians could end up, in fact, with a 17% HST. It's a very real, it's a very likely possibility. So this is the area that I really wanted to focus on starting out, is that middle income earner who has been impacted negatively by this budget. And the minister refers to shifting some of that tax burden to high income earners. The reality is that has not taken place. Those over $200,000, which is only about 5–6% of Nova Scotians, yes, they will pick up an additional tax increase as a result of the surtax coming off the group between 93 and 214,000, which in effect have gotten a tax break. You know, and I was not being coy when I delivered, you know, at least an early draft for the Premier of this province with his 2009 income tax return. Because the Premier of this province is going to get nearly a $500 tax break on his taxes next year. And meanwhile, you know, that middle class, that earner, you know, who goes to work day to day, 35,000, 40,000, 50,000, paycheck to paycheck, one paycheck usually away from some type of financial, you know, trauma, disaster in some cases, if you lose a job. So this is where the hurt is going to come with this budget. And so let's make no mistake about it. Now, the premise of back to balance is really a poorly directed and in fact not substantiated position of the NDP, because we did not have to be out of balance to the extent that we currently are. In fact, over $700 million since June the 9th, 2009. We were not on track to spend an additional $700 million. This was an NDP government decision. Spend early on some of their main areas that they figured would gain a strong political advantage. You know, purchasing of lands from J.D. Irving, which in essence is not a wrong direction, but in terms of the times we live in, we can actually take a strong look and say perhaps half that amount for securing these lands, because there is no timeline. The province does not have a timeline on moving to 12% of protected land. We will get there, we can get there, we should get there, but whether we should spend that kind of amount. Then to put additional monies into the Industrial Expansion Fund, and a big, significant amount of that money going to secure or help a sunset industry hang on for you know, a few more years. We will not have 4 paper mills in this province in 10 years' time, as much as we may like to have them and have those jobs, good-paying jobs. That will not be the reality for Nova Scotia. We know that. And so where some of the big dollars of the $700 million have been directed can actually also be called into question. So we really didn't need to go down the road of needing all of the revenues that you know currently will bring in from the 2%, and it was a very limited view of the Nova Scotia world for the minister to actually get a read of bringing in this HST. And this is why we have heard from Nova Scotians, and we continue to hear from Nova Scotians who feel very strongly against the HST. And it's one that when every purchase is made, this is the kind of little indelible mark that the HST will remind Nova Scotians. They will remind Nova Scotians, or Nova Scotians will be reminded with every purchase that it's no longer 13, it's 15. And that 15 will become embedded in the minds and consciousness of Nova Scotians. And even if we get to balance in 3 or 4 years' time, that's not going to perhaps have the same kind of reaction that I think the minister is hoping there will be. We have come through a cycle of balanced budgets, and yes, there was more revenue in the province, but Nova Scotians will remember those additional hurts that have come about. So I think in this particular fiscal year, it was a poor time to drive up a massive deficit and then ask the middle class to turn around and pay a significant portion. So we will continue to hear about this. Now, some of the amendments to the Income Tax Act of giving, a small amount affordable living tax credit, does make some sense. But once again, Nova Scotians are saying, really, this is not a way of dealing with the poverty reduction that's required in this province. The minister talks, about a structural, problem with the finances. Well, we have a structural problem with the poor in Nova Scotia, and this will not be a means to that end. It's a small way of cushioning again the impact of a tax increase, the same as the poverty reduction payment that will go out to income earners of less than $34,000, basically $30,000, but on a sliding scale between $30,000 and $34,000. When it comes to seniors having to pay income tax, and I'm not sure if the minister had heard me during estimates on the budget in previous years. I think that was a real crime in this province, that seniors who were getting the OAS and the supplement and having to pay income taxes. I had in fact heard over the years from a number of accountants who did seniors taxes, and in fact that was something they were amazed at, that in fact somebody with as little income that the OAS affords, 11,000 and something, and that they would in fact still, while receiving the supplement, have to turn around, and yes, it was only a small amount, and a small amount as it was. And in fact, it's hard to believe that some of those taxpayers actually, had contributed to charity with that little income that they had, and they were able to nullify having to pay taxes. So that indeed is a good measure that we see in the Financial Measures Act that will help some of the seniors in our province. So, as the minister knows, I try to be fair on the things that are strong and supportive, and that Nova Scotians can count on in the coming years. That will be a benefit to them. Small business tax is an area that, in fact, we have put forward to Nova Scotians during at least 2 campaigns. We made it a very, very strong pitch in the campaign of 2009. and its value, again, to generating benefits to small business, which in turn reinvest in their business, which also will lead to further employment. Small business people, do provide 50 to 60% of the jobs in our province, and I think we can look to a province like Manitoba for the real change, the significant change that has gone on in regards to the small business tax. They are in the process of complete elimination of the small business tax, which will actually take place this year, 2010. So moving from 5 to 4.5 is not a significant change. It will occur January 1st, 2011. It's a small concession to business, but it won't lead to the kind of change that small business was hoping that the new government would in fact initiate very, very early in their mandate. And so we see at least I suppose a token effort in the small business category, and we hope that perhaps like the corporation tax being reduced, perhaps this will be the start over a number of years of systematically reducing the small business tax. So those are a few of the areas that that have been brought forward in the Financial Measures Act. I think what will be coming forth, from government, if this is the start of their plan for 4 years, perhaps are a number of areas that, in fact, we can expect perhaps some significant cuts. And I, if I want to send a note to any one group, I think it would be our universities. Our universities will be forging a new MOU, and I think with the prepayment, it was designed to get that money off the universities, get it out of the way, and start with a new slate, a new approach in terms of funding universities. And so I'm expecting this to be a very, very challenging piece for government, because we know that we already have the second highest tuitions in the country, and just barely, the second highest. We may, in fact, we'll move very quickly to the highest if government doesn't give a good degree of support to universities. In fact, that's an area in our province we have lagged behind other provinces, and that is government giving post-secondary universities and colleges a good percentage of their operating, and we've been very weak on the capital side, and that's an area that our 10 institutions, 13 community colleges will be needing. We haven't talked much in this House about the infrastructure deficit that these institutions do face and will continue to face. So it's going to be a very, very, I think, a tough piece that we didn't see in this budget, anything around universities, because the prepayment was made, which led to the current massive deficit, $488 million tabled in the budget, projected $222 million this year, over $700 million. And the minister likes to call upon what the advisory panel said was the direction that the province should be going. In fact, the Premier today, in one of his answers, referenced the three areas. But, the one area yet that we seem to be lacking, a significant push is growing the economy. And that's going to be, the sustainable piece that needs to be worked upon, because that's where new jobs will be created. That's where we will hold on to graduates from our universities and colleges. And we know the current, tax credit put forward, in brochure style during the election, $15,000 really amounts to only about 2,000 and something in actual tax credit. We don't get 15,000. Students will not get $15,000, and they're starting to. They know that, and they're reading that, and they know that with the kind of debt averaging around 30,000 that our students have, it's going to be tough to hold them here in our province. And it's an area that, while the budget, brings this measure in, again, it's not likely to have the calculated desire that government is banking on. In fact, our neighbor, New Brunswick, who instituted this some years ago, have found it wanting in terms of capturing their graduates. And so again, it's a measure that is there as part of the budget this year, but again, it's part of this NDP experiment, the same as going deep in debt in the first year of government's mandate. We will have to see how, in fact, that works going forward. So, Mr. Speaker, one big area that the budget deals with is that of pensions, the pensions of public service workers in this province, and these are very significant changes. And I know my colleague later on, who has a real interest in this particular area, will be making some comments about the changes that are there. And again, we know that there was again need for some change in this direction, but we are starting to hear from public service. From the employees, that perhaps there is more here than meets the eye about the kind of changes and impacts that they will have in the long term. And because the new trusteeship, as the minister has talked about, in fact, could determine what happens after 5 years. And if we don't have the pension 100% funded, I'm very familiar with the teacher's pension and the kind of problems that it's had through the years. And this is why the NSTU went to a different formula for teachers after retiring after 2006. Some were given an option, and we know that a significant number decided to leave the profession because what was happening going forward was that indexing would be based upon the performance of the fund, and many decided to leave. Those that are currently in the system, or those that are on pension, will be protected. But those will now, after April 6, will be impacted in a different way. So there's a lot in this budget that Nova Scotians, as well as the critics in opposition, are taking a look at. and I'm expecting that over the next while, all members, I would hope, I know all members of my party will speak about the Financial Measures Act because we know that both in the short and long term, this is going to impact on the lives of Nova Scotians. This is the one thing that, you know, sometimes when we get those large documents and they have line-by-line items of the different departments, you know, we kind of don't put that human face to a budget. But, you know, the budget and the policies that are behind it through the Financial Measures Act, in fact, will affect every Nova Scotian. And those are the effects that we will see and that we will hear and we will receive from Nova Scotians over the next number of days and, in fact, years, because some aspects of this budget, you know, do address the long term. The one that I just referenced, pensions, that will have implications for somewhere, I think, in the vicinity of 15 to 16,000 Nova Scotians. And we are starting to hear from them in larger numbers each day as they get to understand the impacts that it will have. So, Mr. Speaker, those are the areas that I felt needed to be addressed. You know, starting again with the HST, the changes around income tax in our province, the pensions. These are definitely the big three that are in this year's budget, and I'm pleased to have presented some of the voice of Nova Scotians that we are hearing around those areas. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I take my place.
Thank you. The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am pleased to rise, have the opportunity to speak on Bill number 24, the Financial Measures Act. And my remarks today will outline the philosophical difference that I have with this 2010 budget, and I will outline a vision of how our province of Nova Scotia can enjoy the experience of greater prosperity for people of all income levels. I believe we can achieve this vision with a commitment by government to live within its means. Now, in fairness to the minister, I do believe we share the notion that government must look to change. And government must look to change direction to ensure we achieve balanced budgets. Now, the minister had mentioned that we were on an unsustainable path, but I will highlight that we were in a path of balanced budgets. And I would have to ask the question in this House, where would we be today had we not had balanced budgets over the past 8 years? I believe government should have stayed on that path. I believe we were closer to balance than the minister has indicated, and I believe that a balanced budget could have been achieved without tax increases. The minister also said that 1.1 million of the 1.4 million figure that he has used to identify debt over the coming years will come from the expenditure side of the operating budget. I think that is good. And in fact, I don't believe we have any other choice. And primarily because Nova Scotia, we don't have any revenue windfalls to look to in the future. I believe government should live within its means, and I believe it was time for government to reevaluate its direction. I don't believe this government chose to reevaluate its direction in any meaningful way. There have been no meaningful changes to expenditure in this 2010 budget. Had there been, it would make things easier for our future. If changes are made today, it would mean less drastic changes in the future. And the reason I use the word drastic is because, and I've seen this from my experience with money and helping people save for their retirement, decisions today, once they're put in force, have a tremendous impact later on in life. and they make things a lot easier in life if you make decisions that are wise today. When I was preparing my remarks today, I asked myself, how relevant is this debate for most Nova Scotians? Now, we look at the newspapers, the radio and the television, the media coverage of government, and while every issue is important, some of them must seem silly in comparison to what we're discussing today. These are heavy issues, and maybe that's why they're not reported on as often as some of these issues that we would deem smaller, or at least I would deem that are certainly less important than big decisions that are being made with this budget. And perhaps it's not easy to communicate what's happening with this budget in a soundbite for people. But decisions to change direction may take years to affect the lives of Nova Scotia. And the government who makes these decisions may very well be long gone when those decisions have effect. And that doesn't matter what government is in power. Now, I think about, when people spend their time, I think about something that I had a notion that was brought to me some years ago, where there's things are either categorized as being important or not important, or urgent or not urgent. And you can split that up into a quadrant of 4. And people say, and I do believe this, that your time is best spent in the area, in the quadrant, of things that are within your control, that are urgent, that are not urgent, but are important. And this budget, I think, and any budget, is an example of that. It doesn't seem like it's something that's urgent, because we're not going to see the impact of it, perhaps for many years to come. But it is very important. And I think that's why it is deserving of attention. And the impacts that this budget will have are deserving of attention. They're deserving of headline attention. Because decisions today are urgent and important with respect to this budget, and they're going to have great lasting impact on our future. Mr. Speaker, numbers often do not seem very human. And what makes it human for me is my vision that when we make decisions in this House, that we are passing the torch to the next generation. Who are these people? Well, for me, I think of my nieces. I don't have children myself, but I have 4 little nieces, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of them, because I think about them when I think about these decisions. My oldest niece, Sarah, is 10 years old. She loves to read. She loves animals. She had a pet calf named Daisy, and unfortunately Daisy passed away this year. And Sarah was very disappointed with that. It was an accident, and this poor little calf got crushed when it was feeding with the other cows. And poor Daisy was discovered one day, and she was no longer with us. Down the road. But Sarah, I think she'd like to have a horse someday, and I hope she gets to have a horse. I think she'd take very good care of the horse. She's very good at keeping things in order. We noticed from an age when she was very young, she seemed to be interested or intent on keeping things in order, organizing things. So maybe she'll be an accountant someday. Now, I've tried to teach her a little bit about investing, and she knows the power of dividends. And we've even counted out, I've paid her dividends for a few stocks that she owns, and this has made her learn the value of investing and the value of saving, and perhaps the value of living within her own means. And as a saver, she's creating power for herself and her future. She's good at Monopoly. In fact, she's beaten me. She's also beaten me at chess, and I will say that she's beaten me with her own devices, without any handicaps. So Sarah's a very smart girl, and I think about her. And I also think about Elizabeth, who's next in line. Elizabeth is 7 years old. And Elizabeth, all the girls are musical, but Elizabeth enjoys playing the piano, and she also likes dancing, and she's not afraid to get up on the stage and dance when called upon, and sometimes she'll do it on her own accord. Now, Elizabeth thinks Monopoly is boring, so perhaps she's headed for more of an artistic future. I think of Annie. Annie is 5, and Annie is a funny little girl. She often comes out with a lot of funny things that you wouldn't expect from a young girl. And she made me laugh recently when I was telling her I would promise I would leave the office and come by for a visit. And as you know, in this house, as you all know, we're all very busy and there's great demands on our time. And I was feeling bad one day, so I promised Annie, and Annie's retort to me was, she said, "You better not break your promises." And I had to laugh at that, and perhaps that's good advice for all of us here in this legislature. I think of Mary Catherine. Now, she's just 3, and we love her to death. She's a real cutie, and her personality is developing each day. So these are the little people I think about who are so far removed from our decisions in this legislature. But exactly. And what a member has just said adjacent to me is that it impacts them, and it does. It will impact their future. Much the same way, 30 years ago, decisions were being made that are impacting our future today. So to me, Mr. Speaker, these numbers, while they appear boring to many people, they're very important. And they're very human. How can we better visualize these numbers? And I'm trying to give this explanation for people out there who may not like numbers, and they may be more attracted to envisioning things perhaps with objects. And I think if the economy is like a train that's chugging along, and there are many people that are needed to keep that train running, and they're everybody that we have in Nova Scotia. They're the young people that are going to school, that are trying to learn and to better themselves so someday they can go to work and add value for somebody. They're the people who go out and buy things in our province to keep the economy chugging along. The people that went to work today and the people that went to work last night, if perhaps they're working shift work. Now, the government does many things, but one of the things it does is it taxes people, and that's necessary. We get great value for that. But the taxes act like a brake on the train. And if the brakes are too strong, taxes are too high, we slow the train down. We hamper the momentum of the train, and in this case, we hamper the momentum of the economy. So how does a train pick up more people and grow? Well, the train needs to make it to the next station. And each time it makes it to a new station, it is much like a new business which begins in our province. And I can think of a couple recently which have happened in my own area, and ones where this government has supported, and I thank them for that. One is Halifax Biomedical, which is based in Mabu, and they're creating 75 new knowledge economy jobs in rural Nova Scotia. I'm happy about this because it says that we're really starting to live in an age where business can happen anywhere in this province and anywhere in the world. I'm also happy about New Page and Nova Scotia Power's partnership to build a biomass cogeneration facility. That's going to create more jobs. And New Page has been hiring people. I have friends who have returned home from working out west because they've been able to gain employment at New Page. And some of this is because people are retiring and there's a new workforce going in. But the pulp and paper industry is one that's been on a precarious edge the past number of years as fewer people are buying newspapers and the world is moving more towards electronic means of distributing and reading information. But New Page has a strength in the fact that it's very they're right on the edge of the they're right on the they're very strong in the sense that their technology is cutting edge. And they have a strong workforce, they have good supply of fiber, and also the paper they produce, the type of paper they produce, they're finding that it's meeting a market not just for that's become more popular, but also it's a cheaper, high-quality paper. So these businesses can only thrive when our economy is thriving. And Nova Scotia, our government makes decisions around these budgets. They affect our economy here. And let's put that visualization aside for a moment and look at factors that determine prosperity for Nova Scotians. One of them is our ability to be productive, our gross domestic product, or our GDP. And a lot of our GDP is based on our population. If our population is growing, it's easier for our GDP to grow. We've got more people working, we've got more people producing, more people selling, more money coming in return into our economy to help support local businesses, be they convenience stores or restaurants, forms of entertainment, whether they be our recreation facilities in our communities. But our population is not growing, and that presents a challenge for Nova Scotia to improve our productivity and to improve our prosperity, because that's what it's all about. I think back to the community I grew up in, Judic. We no longer have a school there, but we at one time had a primary to 12 school. And I remember looking back at my yearbooks, even when I was younger, when I was still going to school, and I would see many people who were no longer in Judic. They had moved on to university. But I noticed something else. They didn't seem to be coming back. And if we look at the period from the 1980s, there's almost like a cutoff there where we start to see almost everyone who graduated from our school in Judic has moved away from the community. And that disappoints me, because we all want to see, our communities are very important to us. No matter what Nova Scotian is listening out there today, you know that the community you grew up in is important. And it's something that you want it to continue. You don't want it to die. And when you see people leaving, it makes you question the future, and it makes you question, it's part of who we are, our communities. So it's important for me to try to see a future for places like Judic and all the other communities in the area I represent, and truthfully, for everybody in this province, because most of our communities are rural. Now, businesses in our economy face world competition. We have to be competitive here. We need to have a government that recognizes the importance of keeping things competitive here at home. And we can do that by having a government that reduces red tape, makes it easier to run day-to-day business. But we can do it with another way. Government can help to ensure that people who take a risk aren't heavily taxed. The bigger our government is, the higher our taxes are, the harder it is for that to happen. And I don't see this budget changing that. We should not be taxing creativity and innovation. In effect, when we keep a large government, when we keep high taxes, that's what we're doing. And we're making it harder for Nova Scotia to grow. We're making it harder for that prosperity to filter out to all the communities around our province. So how can we grow our productivity? Well, one way, and this might seem kind of humorous, but perhaps we should start a Carry On Nova Scotia campaign. I don't know if you're familiar with Carry On Canada, but I believe during the war effort there was a measure made by government to encourage Canadians to have more children. And I know this, I've heard it joked about in the past, and it seems kind of funny. I'm not doing much about it. I'm 35 and I don't have any children yet, Mr. Speaker, so perhaps I'm one to talk, but but I think that
you can begin the program.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Inverness has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You'll have a lot of calls after this game.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, it is good to hear, yes, from the Minister of Finance that people are listening to my remarks today. And I do say that as a point of humor, but it is, there's some truth to that as well. It's important for Nova Scotia to continue with more young Nova Scotians coming up through the ranks. But that's something that's hard for government really to control. And so I think perhaps would be better to focus our efforts on trying to grow the economy. And
Leonard, you go over there. Come on, Mr. Speaker.
So if we look at our economy, there's two sections. There's a public sector and there's a private sector. And bigger government means it's harder for private business to grow. And I'm talking a lot about this, but I'm talking about it because I think it's very important. I think it's where our focus should be. If we look at private business, we look at people who take risks. They take risks with their own money. They put up a lot of their own savings on the line to try to start a business. And yes, sometimes they make money, sometimes they make lots of money, but that's not a bad thing. They need to be rewarded. We need those people to take chances because they're the ones that create employment. And I think of that with somebody like Chad Monroe with Halifax Biomedical that's in Mabou. He's created 13 jobs in a very small community, and he plans to create 75 more over 5 years. That's a tremendous contribution. And I would like the members of this House to perhaps give Chad a round of applause for making a difference in rural Nova Scotia, for creating jobs in rural Nova Scotia. Now, Chad, and I hope Chad doesn't mind speaking about him today, but I'm sure that he's taken time away from his family to do this. He's made many sacrifices, and I think that is worthy of note. People who are working out there trying to create these businesses make many sacrifices. They don't leave the office every day at a prescribed time. They leave it when they can leave. And many weeks go by, I'm sure that even though they've worked, there's no paycheck because they've made a sacrifice. And they're hoping that their sacrifice will result in greater prosperity for them. I think government needs to focus on helping those people, to make it easier for them. I think we're paying enough taxes. I don't think we should be increasing taxes, and I'm sure many of these people would agree. I also think it's important for young people to have an opportunity to work for these kinds of businesses so that we'll have more young people willing to take chances, to start businesses and create employment and to create prosperity for this province. Now, I think also that if we can increase employment in this province, we will start to address the issue of our population. And our population is flat, and in some cases, we might even say it's declining at times. I think in 2006, it was the first year that we had more deaths than births in the province. Now, I think people will be happy to come to Nova Scotia. We have lots to offer, and I think people will also want to stay here, but we need to have opportunities for them. And I think this budget is not putting us in the right direction for that to happen. Now, one of the things I look about incurring deficits, which will happen with this budget and the coming 3 next budgets, is that these deficits, if we can't pay for them today, that's obvious because we have to go into deficit to make the expenditures that are outlined, but when are we going to be able to pay for them in the future? That's the question I ask. Our economy is defensive here in Nova Scotia. We don't have fluctuations in revenue for government. We're not like Alberta, where revenues can fluctuate from 8% to 25% of their budget just because the price of oil goes up in value. Something completely out of their hands, but something by which they receive great benefit. We don't have that option. So if we can't pay for it today and we don't see a future where we can pay for it, then why should we be incurring the expense today? We're also hindering our ability to grow. The one thing that we have within our control is to try to live within our means so that we can have a future of lower taxes, so that we can start to reward the people that make our economy run. And these are the people I speak of, the entrepreneurs of this province. We should be balancing budgets today to hold our power over the debt so that our debt does not start to take power over us. Money is power, but it is only power when we're able to save it. It is not power when we hand it over to lenders who are willing to finance our debt. Now, I can't support this budget because I believe it puts the brakes on our train, our province. Higher taxes and no focus on trying to reduce the size of government defeat the purpose of trying to keep Nova Scotia moving in the right direction, the direction that we had been running in for the past 8 years. Now, the other thing is that incurring this extra deficit has predicated the need for higher taxes. So it's a vicious circle, Mr. Speaker. And I'm disappointed that Nova Scotians are going to have to wait 3 years to have an opportunity to elect a new government, one that values fiscal sensibility. And I don't believe we should be adding to our debt because it simply means we're hurting our future. Now, many people do not understand money. This is where I believe government should show leadership. It's where government must show leadership. And very few people understand money. We see this because we look at the savings rate. Back in the early 80s, the savings rate for most Canadians was in the neighborhood of about 18%. Now, that may have been because interest rates are very high and there was great reward to save money at that point in time. Over the past couple of years, we've actually seen savings rates move into the negatives, where people are spending more money than they take in. And why is this? Well, I suppose it's because everybody wants instant gratification. They want it all today. I also think it has to do with a cultural mindset change. Younger people today never had to go through times like people who lived throughout the Depression had to live with. And those people learned the value of having to save because they had to. They went through a period where they were hurt by the economy. And it made them think, well, gee, perhaps if times are good, I should put something aside today so that if that ever happens again, I'm going to be protected. So my point, Mr. Speaker, is that very few people understand money. And that is where government has to step up to the plate and make decisions that help people, that benefit people. Sometimes those can be tough decisions, but they're important. And going back to my point earlier, we need to treat them with recognized urgency. For the decisions made in this budget will have a significant impact on Nova Scotians for years to come. Now, for some people, this obviously means change, and for some people, change is something to be feared. I see change as potential. Potential to improve the economy and potential to improve the prosperity of Nova Scotians at every income level. Change gives us potential to realize our potential. And what does potential for a smaller government mean? I think it means potential to someday to have lower taxes. I think it means government services are stabilized. We don't have to worry about the cost of government because we have a better control over it. I think that it means a smaller government. And you know, many people in government are close to retirement. Maybe these people can leave government. Perhaps they can become entrepreneurs. Perhaps they can use the valuable experience they've gained in government to put to work within the private sector to help grow our economy. Smaller government means less pressure to tax the people. And it means power to decrease our debt. And when we do that, we're helping out the young people like my 4 nieces whom I mentioned earlier, because they motivate me to make these statements. Now, a smaller government also means the ability to create a more competitive business environment so that businesses can prosper and create jobs for Nova Scotians. And I think that a smaller government allows government to perform better. And there's greater accountability to the people. And Mr. Speaker, I also think with all this talk about numbers that it also means compassion, because when government services are sustainable, Nova Scotians are protected. My remarks today, I hope they've outlined my philosophical differences with this budget. And I hope I've outlined a vision, a path that Nova Scotians could be taking today, and I hope they have the chance to go on that path in the future. And that path, my vision is that they will experience greater prosperity. And I think that that happens with balanced budgets and with a smaller government. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I thought that perhaps we'd have a little bit more time before my turn arrived, but I'm happy to jump up and say a few words on the Financial Measures Act, which is before us today. And as members know, the Financial Measures Act is all of the changes to legislation that are required to really bring the budget that was voted on yesterday into, to make it reality, to make sure that everything is properly dotted and all of the acts have been changed in accordance with what the direction is of the government. And that's what we have before us today. So it's a fairly, not a huge act really as these things go, but it has a lot of different sections and relating to various acts. And as the Finance Minister has mentioned, a lot of the bill before us, this Bill 24, relates to changes to the Superannuation Act, which is our pension plan for current and past civil servants. And it's actually having a lot of reverberations with those pensioners that are currently retired, people that are no longer in the workforce, and people that are current employees of the province who, you know, feel that there have been some substantive changes made here in this Act, which, you know, are going to have a long-term reverberations in their lives. And just to begin with that aspect of Bill 24, Mr. Speaker, I feel that it's important that we look at this and consider whether or not the pensioners and the current members of the plan were properly consulted in the run-up to this change, because that's what really strikes me more than anything else, is that there was no consultation, and that most, I would say all members, learned about this really when they received a letter, and I believe it was from the minister. And I understood, I haven't got a copy of that letter, I'd like to get it, but I understood that it begins with, "The plan is more secure now than ever." That was the quote that I was given in speaking to one of the pensioners who had called me. And that would give you a great peace of mind that the plan is more secure now than ever. But what the minister said in his opening comments was that the plan is very insecure, that it's underfunded at 69%, I think. I'll have to find my notes. I was writing them as the minister spoke. But that it's underfunded, and that the trend is that it would go down as much as to only 30% funded in the next 30 years. You know, if nothing's done, if there's no changes made. Now, okay, so now the minister says that when these changes are enacted, the plan will be more secure than ever. I think that a lot of people read that and said, my goodness, the plan's more secure than ever. And again, the letter sent to them, Mr. Speaker, was not detailed in its itemization of what the changes would be or how this would impact an individual. I think it was fairly general. And again, as other members have mentioned, something as complex as pension legislation is really difficult for the average person to get interested, get their head around, understand the implications of. I think those that are currently retired fully understand when there's a threat to their income or the stability or the security that they have worked for over their lifetime. And they're probably a lot more aware than the thousands of people that are currently working for the government. And I will say those working for the government are not in a position to speak out on this unless their union would, and their union's been silent. Like, that's a great question, Mr. Speaker. Where are the unions that represent our public service? NSGEU or CUPE or any of the other unions, we've heard nothing from them. And really, you know, even a few months ago, a year ago, when Bill Black was doing his look at pensions and pension reform, we had visitation, you know, at our caucus, at the Liberal caucus. I'm sure the NDP caucus did too, where the union leaders were adamant that they had to protect the rights of their members, of these union members. Now they are like uncharacteristically silent. They've just fallen off their radar screen because they don't want to cause this government any stress, and they don't want to shine the spotlight on this NDP government, Mr. Speaker. And they certainly would not have hesitated one moment to blast any other government. They are really bending over backwards to give a lot of allowances to the NDP government that they helped to elect. And there's no question of that either, because we saw letters to their members and calls to their members to vote for this NDP government. It was going to be so wonderful. Well, I hope that the members of our current employees will realize that these changes were made without consultation, and that there was no opportunity to sit down and say, you know, here's the condition of the plan, here's perhaps the dilemma that government found itself in. Let's talk about what some of those options are. Because what we know, Mr. Speaker, is that you can increase your contributions, you can decrease benefits, you can have people work longer, and the minister spoke about the rule of 80 and the rule of 85. I do think that if changes are going to be made on that one, I am pleased to see that current employees did not have a change in the rule of 80, that will change for any new people that are joining the public service. And I think in that case, Mr. Speaker, it's a lot more fair, because really when you're employed and you enter into an agreement for a pension, that's a contract really that you make with your employer. And when you're you know, whatever your job is, I'm going to speak about professionals and so on, but if you go into that contract knowing that your skills and your education are worth a certain amount in the private sector, but you choose to do public service, what has been told to our public servants over the years is you aren't earning as much perhaps as you would if you worked in the private sector, but you are getting a good solid pension that you're working towards. Now, what we've done in this bill, and what one can only assume this will pass and it is a done deal, but what this Bill 24 does is effectively change the whole premise of the public service pension. And no longer is the Minister of Finance the trustee. He mentioned he's the sole trustee right now. Well, all of a sudden, we'll create this joint trustees and a board that will take that off the provincial back, essentially. You know, and I'm guessing there are tremendous savings for the province that we haven't heard a figure from the minister about what kind of savings are in there for the province. But I would bet you this is your single biggest savings you found this year. And it is because people are not as aware of how this is working and how it actually is affecting your bottom line. I know that the underfunded liability for a pension, and if we're only funded at 69%, then, Mr. Speaker, that underfunded liability is shown on our books of the province and is an obligation that the province carries. So if we can distance ourselves from that and create a board and put it all onto the shoulders of a board of trustees, and then the plan has to stand or fall on its own merits, then we have effectively unloaded that liability. That's how I would see it, and I think that's probably where the benefit is right now to the province of Nova Scotia and the NDP government that's looking hard for ways to, I guess, lighten their financial burden. But as I say, for the members of the plan, they felt they had really a contract and an obligation was there from the government, and that this has been done very unilaterally, without any consultation, without an opportunity for them to even feel they had something to say in what measures would be taken or how that might be negotiated. And the minister has said he doesn't yet know what the board's going to look like, how it's going to be structured exactly. It seems like, okay, consultations are going to begin now. And I do believe the minister used that word, that he's now going to consult with the plan members as they go forward and, you know, create this new structure that's going to be in place for the future. And that's great to have some consultation, but it's going to be after the fact, after this law is changed, and it really gives the government carte blanche to move forward as they like, because they will have done this, you know, before the unions, or, well, the unions weren't going to get alarmed anyway, because the unions probably knew all about it. Their members should be asking their union leadership a question or two about where all of their dues that they've been paying for years and years to get representation and to be protected. Where's that money gone? If all of a sudden the unions are silenced on an issue that's so fundamental to the 30,000 members that are represented there. Well, there's 30,000 plan members, 12,000 I think are retirees already, so they would no longer be current union members. But again, they trusted their unions to represent them. And this is hitting very close to home. Now, what they're going to lose that we know for sure is the guaranteed indexing, which was cost of living indexing. And Mr. Speaker, you and I know the cost of living's been rising very, very slowly. It's almost been flat. I think this year we said to pretty much zero. No inflationary pressure this last year. And, you know, so for the next 5 years, there's a guarantee of 1.25% increase on those pensions. But after that, there's no further guarantee. And the minister referred to the fact that the plan must be 100% funded before they'll be looking at indexing or offering increases to the retirees and the pensioners. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that is going to be a long way off to get from 69 to 100% funded. Now, you know, I'd like to know how they plan to do that so quickly. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Now, we're putting hundreds of millions into that fund then as a province. Something's got to happen. If the minister thinks that it's going to be 100% funded within a year, you know, that's pretty perplexing. I will say, Mr. Speaker, that I have a meeting lined up with Stephen Wolf, who's the head of our superannuation pension fund, but unfortunately it wasn't prior to our getting up today and speaking on the Financial Measures Act. So I hope to know more about it tomorrow, and I'll certainly be asking him how on earth could this plan go from 69 to 100% funded in 1 year. that, you know, that to me is pretty astounding, especially if we're supposed to be on a trend, you know, the way things were, that we would be, you know, less than a third funded in 30 years. I mean, we were definitely on the exact opposite train. So it is, you know, a big question to me, and I'd like to know exactly how that's going to be structured. The minister seems pretty confident, but that's not unlike the minister. He tends to be very confident. So, you know, he thinks he's got it all figured out. But, Mr. Speaker, I do mention that this is very complex stuff. Don't forget. And there are an awful lot of, it was sort of a compliment. But, Mr. Speaker, what I do think is that there are a lot of complexities in this and a lot of factors that are out of our control. And again, we talked about the investments that are underlying these pension plans. Clearly, when we're talking about the funding, that's money in the plan that's been invested so that the people who are current members can have that security and know that they'll get their pension. We're not anywhere near 100% funded. So, you know, I just feel that we don't know what the markets are going to do or what our investments are going to do. Do you think you could ask for some water for me? And we're concerned about where the future is going to be. And again, I just think that, you know, it's important that somebody stand in the House and make the point that the current members, and especially the current pensioners, really feel that they have been, in a sense, hoodwinked and let down. They've been cheated out of what they felt was a guarantee when they retired. Some of them made decisions, Mr. Speaker, to retire early. That's not uncommon. I know quite a few people who are right now planning their own retirements and looking for how they can ensure that they have some adequate income in retirement. And there's a lot of people that sit down with their financial advisors, look at the benefits that they're entitled to or the money they've accumulated, and make a decision based on that about whether or not they'll retire this year or perhaps 5 years' time, or just what would work best in terms of their ongoing income. We know that people are living longer, and therefore we have to have security in place. And so I just feel that there has been a breach of contract there. But I will say that in the wording of the Financial Measures Act, there was great care taken to craft the wording. So there, you know, probably is no way to challenge it in the courts. And I think that the minister knows that when he was quoted in the press today as saying any challenge would be a waste of time and money. And I think he knows that because they anticipated there would be a challenge. And knowing that, you know, arranged it, the wording so that could be really stopped, that it would be stopped dead in its tracks. And with that kind of wording to say that they're not responsible for any previous commitments of any previous governments, I think it says something about no past promises of any government will have any bearing on this act. So essentially, with the stroke of a pen, we can rewrite the rules, Mr. Speaker. We can just rewrite the rules for people who worked 30 and 40 years for the provincial government. And I know there's a sense that, you know, pensioners are lucky because they've had an indexed pension and they've been public servants. And maybe there's a sense that this group won't have a lot of sympathy with the general public. And I know there are a lot of people that have retired without adequate benefits, that have worked their whole lives and never had a pension plan. And, you know, Mr. Black's pension reform had a couple of good suggestions. One of them is a portable pension plan that anybody who's out there working for small business or for companies that aren't large enough to provide their own plan could join that provincial plan and have portability from one job to another, since people nowadays tend to work for, many companies over the life of their working life. It's not like the old days when you joined a company and stayed there for 30 or 40 years. And so we need something that's going to provide a pension, provide a means for the employers to put money in, and support their employees, which I think many companies want to do, but they don't have a vehicle to do it. Those kind of suggestions from Mr. Black's report were good ones, Mr. Speaker, because their aim was to get more people covered with some kind of a plan to help them in their retirement. What we don't want is a wave of retirement that's going to mean a lot of seniors that are living below the poverty line. I don't need to remind members of the House that, many of the people living below the poverty line are senior women. women who because they cared for family members or didn't have the same opportunities as perhaps their husbands or others, didn't have the work and the pay that they were entitled to, really. Even when they did work, they didn't make the wages that they should have. And therefore, you see a lot of older women that are living in poverty. And we should remember that these public servants are living on an average pension of under $20,000. The average public servants pensioner that's going to be affected by these changes is earning less than, I think it's in the $17,000 range per year. It was quoted in one or two of the articles today that I read. So we're not talking about fat cats here. We're really not. We're talking about people who are living on a modest income. Now, I know they're above the group that are going to get the special tax credit for fighting poverty, and they're above the group that's going to probably get the affordable living tax credit. If you had a family income there, they may fall above that. But I'm really making the point that these people are living close to the bone and carefully, and they're not wealthy people, and that we should be considering them. As one pensioner said, they're not all retired deputy ministers. They're the people who've worked in our front line, in our Access Nova Scotia offices, in our motor vehicle branches. You know, they're people who've done a lot of the clerical and hard work that's out there, but not high paid. And what they offered was to work for those wages and get a good pension when they retired. And this is going to threaten their future. And they're very worried about it, because when you set up your list, your joint trustees, and when the government distances itself from that whole concern about the health of the pension, because we're going to walk away from it once we think it's going to be fully funded. I don't know how that's going to happen again, but as I say, if it's fully funded and we've set up a trustee board, we're going to wipe our hands of it. Let's face it, we're washing our hands and walking away and saying, now you guys are on your own with your own trustees, and you have to manage it yourself. Well, as we mentioned earlier, that was done with the teachers union as well, but it was done in consultation with their members, and it was not done without their knowledge. It was done even with a vote. They actually ultimately voted on whether or not they supported that. And they did set up a joint trusteeship where they had more control. They wanted to have that control, at least a majority of their members did, and they were willing to do that in order to have a bigger say in their pension. They were also offered the opportunity to retire now if you wanted to, and take the benefits that were currently in place, so that individuals could make that decision for themselves. Now, the minister said that there was some concern, I think, about the number of public servants who are eligible to retire. 2,000 people eligible right now. 4,000 more will be eligible in the next 5 years. So, you know, we know that a lot of senior people or people with a lot of experience in our civil service are eligible right now, or soon will be, to retire. And it may well be that the minister was frightened of an exodus of those trained and experienced people. You know, and I'm not surprised, because in fact in the school boards they lost a lot of people in their final years. I know a number that were principals and vice principals who decided now was the time to go, while their guarantee of an index was still in place. Now, I know in the House we have a number of people who've been teachers, and so they will understand exactly what I'm talking about. They were probably involved as members of that plan. But certainly it was done in a much more consultative way. It did raise tempers in the teachers union. There's no question their president was under the gun while this discussion was ongoing. But they took a stand, and they sold that position to their members, and they explained what the benefits were, and they explained what was at stake, and they agreed to it. But where is that consultation in this act? If you get a letter that says, well, we've never been as secure as we are now, and you know, you're in good hands, don't worry, be happy. You know, but at the same time, you're taking away what had been a guaranteed cost of living indexing. And Mr. Speaker, as an HRM member, I'm quite aware of the HRM pension plan, and it has never offered indexing. Now, actually, the member from Dartmouth East had told me that I think Dartmouth had originally had indexing in their Dartmouth City plan, but we didn't in the Halifax one, and the amalgamated plan has no indexing. And I've had the opportunity to speak with many pensioners and with their widows who have come in to complain that there's been no increase for years and years. A woman that was in to see me recently said the last increase had been 2001, and then after they did a lot of lobbying, there was something like a 0.25% increase offered in 2007 or 8. I mean, 0.25%. She said it was so small. It was, you know, you didn't even, you could hardly notice it. It was so small. But I mean, of course, they took that because they're not entitled to any indexing. And they have lobbied, they've lobbied during provincial elections to say to us, what can you do? And why does the superintendent of pensions, who's a provincial employee, have the sole responsibility to say yay or nay to any indexing? And again, the HRM pension is not fully funded. And because it isn't fully funded, the superintendent of pensions, who is in office here in the provincial government, looks at that and she determines whether the plan is strong enough. And she has routinely said, no, you don't have the strength in that plan. Even when the plan members have been agreeable to do it, or city council has said, yes, let's do it, the ultimate decision rested here in the provincial government, and they've been told no. And I'll tell you, it's a travesty to see somebody who's been trying to live on that for 10 and 15 years with scarcely any increase and no obligation, no expectation that there will be an increase. And you can only imagine, with the costs that have gone up, how hard that is on our pensioners. You know, and I say again, Mr. Speaker, we don't want to see people retiring in poverty after working their entire lives for the public service. That's just not something that we'd like to see. And let's remember how long people are living. And I know the minister mentioned that. That's part of the pressure on pension plans, is that people are living a lot longer. And we celebrate that. We know that our good health system is paying for some of that. New drugs, new procedures. And it's not just that they're living longer, but they're actually living in a much fuller way, living healthy lives with a good quality of life. And, you know, I think many of us can see that in our communities where older people are so active and so able to contribute because of their age. But at the same time, it means if we're intending to retire, you know, in our 50s or early 60s, many people not waiting till they're 65, it's simply many, many years of retirement that they have to try and live off their savings and off their pensions. And so making a change like this, and I'm going to use the word unilaterally, making a change like this is very harmful to the people who are covered, and I think disrespectful in the sense that there was no consultation. That probably is my major concern, that this would have taken people entirely by surprise. And that's not a way to treat people who have contributed, you know, years and years to their service to the province of Nova Scotia in whatever capacity. And we know that we have good people, and I think it's important that we make the distinction that this is not just about taxpayers' money going to fund people or bail out people, as the press likes to use. This is an employer-employee relationship. The province of Nova Scotia employs these people, and we made commitments to them. And we are the employer, and if that rests on the sole trustee at the moment, on the Minister of Finance, I hope that he understood that he is responsible for the employees of this province, and that fund ultimately, you know, does rest at his feet. Mr. Speaker, I think I've probably explained a lot about pensions already and how we feel about that. I just feel that in the past, when there was an opportunity for the members to pay extra money into the fund, they were offered tax or contribution holidays, and they were actually had contributions returned to them at different points along the way. And I think it was over 10 years ago that would have happened. In the 90s, I think there was a year at least when there was a contribution holiday and the members, in fact, the union has said to me before, they had wanted to continue to pay, but they were told, no, you can't. Under the rules, you can't continue to top it up. You've gone above whatever the percentage was, 105% or something, which it's allowed to go to. So they were not able to over-contribute when the plan was doing well, and now the plan is underfunded, and they're going to have to pay the price. And that is really what we are, you know, concerned about here today on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, on the tax brackets, I think it's good to have the surcharge removed on the higher income earners, but as we've pointed out quite often here in the legislature and resolutions and otherwise, it's a little bit ironic that there's a high income bracket that's actually going to be better off today with the surcharge removed and the fifth tax bracket brought in. There is a large group there. I think it's sort of in the range of certainly 150,000, I think, is where it's the best advantage, but it goes up to $200,000, where you'll actually be a little bit better off. And it's just ironic because, you know, this government is one that wanted to be fair and wants to help people on the lower end as well. And I don't think that it would ever have been deliberately set to recalibrate our tax system to make a benefit. In fact, in his opening statement, the minister said, you know, we have to get people to pay their share, and we all have to contribute. And he used terms like that in talking about the new fifth tax bracket that's come in, you know, which is unusual. Most provinces don't have 5 tax brackets. So, you know, we've done something pretty unusual in doing that. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, I understand that the government was looking for more income. And so they have created that very top bracket, which there will be few people that fall into that bracket. I'm not sure the exact number, so I won't hazard a guess, but I know that there'll be very few. And Mr. Speaker, what's interesting to note is how very many people in Nova Scotia fall into the lowest tax bracket. And a few years ago, and I imagine it hasn't changed greatly, a few years ago, I think it would have been about 2004 or 5, when John Hamm offered a 10% tax cut to all Nova Scotians. He was unable to do that because he didn't get the federal money that he was hoping or counting on that would have allowed him to do that. And he had to backtrack on the 10% tax reduction, which he had actually brought in, which payroll in companies across the province had begun to adjust for, and people had been earning more. Well, John Hamm clawed that back, but in doing so, he said, you know what, I'm going to leave that 10% tax cut on the table for the lowest tax bracket. So people who fell into the tax bracket under $29,500, I believe was the cap, got to keep it. And what was interesting to me, Mr. Speaker, was realizing that that actually meant 51% of the people working could keep the tax cut. You know, what a sad commentary for our province to know that half of our employed Nova Scotians who are paying taxes and working and trying to raise their families and pay their bills are earning less than or within the lowest tax bracket, and certainly less than $29,500, which was the cap at that time. And as I said, interesting to see whether that's still the same. I haven't seen recent figures on the percentage of our workforce that fall into the tax brackets, but I'm sure, you know, hopefully it's not 50% anymore, but I'm sure it hasn't changed drastically. And it's a sad, sad commentary on our economy and on our province that we have such low wages and you know, haven't moved our people into jobs that pay more. And I know when we hear from NSBI, Mr. Speaker, that's Nova Scotia Business Inc., they talk about the kind of jobs they're trying to bring to Nova Scotia. And they are looking at jobs in the financial sector and in the IT sector and research or biomedical. They know that those jobs pay a lot more than the average Nova Scotian salary. And for that, I hope they have success. I really do. I know we've seen some financial sector improvement with some big companies moving offices here and hiring young Nova Scotians. That's a plus, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, as members of the legislature, each and every one of us should know, Mr. Speaker, we should know what the average income is and where the people in our riding actually are in that, and how they're living. How are they making ends meet? You know, and so we have this Financial Measures Act that's going to raise HST by 2%. Everything we purchase is going to go up by 2%, except a few items that have now been exempt. I'm glad to see children's clothing and children's shoes are going to be exempt. That's very nice. Although, you know, quite frankly, I did buy clothes for my children at Frenchie's. I don't know if the minister ever did, but I used to think that was quite fun to go to Frenchie's and you could get good clothes for children and at really a very small, a pittance really. There's Frenchie's in Halifax, and there's a lot in the province to go to. So there are options for children, and they can be good clothes. And as I say, I think those of us that are here know that you can buy nice clothes for children without spending an arm and a leg. But anyway, definitely it's good to see that we won't be charging them. It may be harder to get shoes, so I'm glad to see no tax on children's shoes. We've taken, and this again, just the provincial tax that's being removed, as I would see it. So we still are going to have to pay our federal portion of that tax. So don't be surprised, Mr. Speaker, if you're buying any children's clothes. There'll be some tax on that. I know you have grandchildren you might be buying some for. So just in that regard. But, you know, I think that there's been a few items sort of almost you know, picked out of the blue a little bit about what we're going to take it off. Diapers is an interesting one. And I know that when you have a young child, you may use a lot of diapers. That's disposable diapers, I'm guessing. Is it all diapers? Is it called cloth diapers as well? Good. Cloth, well, of course, the cloth diapers would come under children's clothing. So there you go. You've got that. I actually was thinking about the environmental lens when it came to disposable diapers. Why are we not looking at the environmental impact of disposable diapers, and why would we offer an advantage to the people who are buying disposable diapers? I mean, it is a product that is not good for the environment, that creates an awful lot of product going to the landfill, that can't be recycled. It's, you know, it's something that certainly I've asked the question about. I know a lot of young families are using cloth diapers, and there's a lot more interesting or probably better designs than there were in the past. And one of the companies that sells those got a Business of the Year award this year from the Chamber of Commerce. It's Nurtured is the company's name. I think it's on Windsor Street, or Roby. But anyway, it's a new, very, very popular store, and people are going there in great numbers because they offer really good service and they're selling high-quality cloth diapers. And I think a lot of the young families are using them. So I do question, where's the environmental green lens that the NDP should be putting on products that they want to support? So a little bit of a question on that. Now, Mr. Speaker, the small business tax.
More concerned about bottled water.
Yeah, I guess. There's a little bit of a green lens there. But, Mr. Speaker, there are a couple of things in here for business, but very little to support the business community. We've got a 0.5% decrease in the small business tax, which, you know, I'm sure they appreciate and is seen as a step in the right direction. That's about all you can say when you take incremental or baby steps in a policy. It's not moving the bar in any significant way. But there is, you know, there is a recognition that that has been adjusted, and that's a positive thing. And taking anything off of the large business tax, I guess you call it large corporation tax, is also positive. It's a real irony that we have a tax that is levied on companies simply because of their size, that they're large and they're successful. Presumably they're profitable, and we charge them this extra tax just because they are a big company. We should really be, you know, offering something that rewards them rather than taxes them extra for that. So, you know, I think that we're glad to see any reduction in that as well, Mr. Speaker. But I had hoped to see something a little bit more that might do more to stimulate the business that is at hand for companies large and small. Again, those are the two that are mentioned there in particular. And Mr. Speaker, the Act, as I say, covers all of the details, the increases in taxes, how the HST is going to be increased, many clauses on the impact with superannuation and how that's going to be implemented. And, you know, overall, Mr. Speaker, I guess I don't need to say that we already voted against the budget. We really take exception to some of the moves in terms of how they're going to affect Nova Scotians. On the special provisions that are put in place, the tax credits, and I think in one instance, it's not even really a credit. You'll simply get money if you are in, I have to look for my budget book here, the poverty reduction credit. That, although it says it's a credit, often with credits, they come off your income. You don't really see the money. And you know, it's not like a check arrives at the door, but the poverty reduction credit, I think, is intended to be that. It says individuals or couples will receive $200 a year, $50 quarterly. What I'm surprised about here, Mr. Speaker, is when I started to read the detail, this is for people with no dependents, so they can't have any children to receive this. And it's for people that are primarily, I guess, living on social assistance. It pretty much says that. It says it's to make life better for people living in poverty, and that it would probably help people with disabilities. A lot of these people may have disabilities, so I certainly do support that. I know we have a lot of people, if they're living on a Canada disability or on social assistance, it's very hard to make ends meet. But, Mr. Speaker, a lot of the people that we worry about in poverty as well are people with children, because if you are raising your child in poverty, they lose in so many ways. They don't get proper nutrition, they may not get safe housing, they don't have the stability financially to seek education. So, you know, I have a concern about, you know, not just couples that are low income, but perhaps single mothers who have 1 or 2 children and need that extra help. And I know there is a child tax credit. I understand the federal government provides that. But I would see families that are living below this threshold as being at very great risk as well. And I'm not sure why the definition was to be, it's either individuals or couples, it says. To qualify, you must be 19 years of age with no dependents. You must be receiving social assistance through the Income Assistance Program as their main source of income. So if this is only for people getting social assistance, I don't know why we just didn't adjust some of the policies or programs in community services rather than sending them a separate check 4 times a year. Isn't that a stunt of some sort, Mr. Speaker? Why wouldn't we simply adjust their payment? Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't we? These are people, when you look at their qualifications, and I think the members are seeing what I'm saying, in order to qualify, you have to be receiving social assistance. So we're already giving them checks as recipients of social assistance. So why are we now going to send them separate checks 4 times a year? To, you know, with the minister's name on it, signed by the Minister of Finance. It's a little bit peculiar to me that we would have chosen that route. You could still announce an increase in funding to the lowest, lowest paid people, those that are living on social assistance, those that are, perhaps many of them with a disability, but you could do it through the Community Services Department, and you could do it through an adjustment to the schedules that are used under the social assistance, or I guess we call it Income Assistance Program is what we call it, because those would be people, I imagine, who are not able to seek employment. So, if they are in fact disabled. But I think there would have been a better way to do that, and I always am a little bit suspect when a government decides to send out a check independently, separately, to individuals, Mr. Speaker, who are obviously in need, but the government is trying to send them a separate check to what? To curry favor or to make them feel that they are being listened to. I think it's a bit of a stunt, and I'll leave it at that. I just don't think it should be done. A few years ago, during the 2003 election, just before the 2003 election, members will remember that we all received $155 checks. And that was through the largesse of our government. Well, goodness me, today we don't feel like there's any room for that kind of largesse, do we? Or the 10% tax cut that was unsuccessfully tried. But, that would be my question on the poverty reduction credit. Is it sure sounds good, but there are a lot of people with children that would need that money, I think, just as much or perhaps more when you're trying to raise a child in poverty. So I am surprised that the cutoff and the requirement is that you have no dependents. That surprises me. And Mr. Speaker, there's a Nova Scotia affordable living tax credit. And that, again, is for a very low threshold of income. It's $30,000 family income. And that's 2 people working. We have to remember that. Oftentimes you'll be in a couple, so you'll have 2 incomes. $30,000, Mr. Speaker, is less than 2 people working full-time, for... I think many of you were working at minimum wage full-time, you'd be over that if there were 2 of you. So I'm not sure, again, the number of people we're going to be able to help. On the poverty reduction side, they have a number. They said it's about 15,000 people that will be helped by that check coming out 4 times a year, $50 for those that didn't catch it. So on the other one, on the Nova Scotia Affordable Living Tax Credit, the credit will be $240 per household plus $57 for each child under 19. So again, that would certainly help in a family that was living, again, in very modest means, under $30,000 with their combined income. I'll remind you again that 50% of Nova Scotians, taxable income is under $30,000. So we're talking about a lot of people in Nova Scotia, although when you combine their income, those people living on that lower level are going to be over and won't be eligible for this tax credit. So, again, without a doubt, I'd say that the major concern that we have with the budget and with the FMA is the fact that we're looking at an increase to 15% for HST again in Nova Scotia. And as often as the minister wants to say that in fact we were at that level for many years, the fact is all of Canada had a 2% decrease in HST. We're taking it back. That makes us the highest tax jurisdiction in North America, and that's not good for tourism or for business or for the sale of luxury or appliances or cars or big ticket items. And I can only imagine, Mr. Speaker, what the impact is going to be on the home building sector. We have heard from them in the past that they were in fact at the meeting when the minister loves to talk about the back to balance meetings. I attended the one in Halifax, one of the last ones that were announced and held. And at that meeting, Paul Petitpas, who is the head of the the Nova Scotia Home Builders Association spoke very, you know, I would say with a lot of passion and conviction that he thought the 2% tax increase would be very harmful to the home building sector. New houses are subject to HST, and new houses, Mr. Speaker, are a measure of how well our economy is doing. All you have to do is turn to the financial pages or see when there's an announcement on how many new home starts there were this quarter. That's how we measure a lot of the economic strength in our community, because it means there are people earning enough to buy those houses. There are a lot of people working to build the houses. A lot of people are selling the home building products. And so building a single house has a great spin-off value, a lot of economic activity generated around it. And when you add 2% to the cost of that house, that's going to be a significant blow to home builders at a time when, ironically again, the government had been offering some benefit for people buying their first home or buying a new home, and had just finished with a tax credit of some sort for people who would buy a new house. So this is going to be very damaging to them, and maybe Paul Petitpas will wonder why he endorsed that so excitedly during the election, saying what a fantastic idea the NDP had, because the NDP have followed it up, Mr. Speaker, with a very unpleasant increase in tax for all Nova Scotians. And so really we have to be very careful before we jump on a bandwagon and get excited about one short-lived tax benefit, which I think is exactly what happened with some people who didn't open their eyes and look at what else was on the horizon. And Mr. Speaker, this increase in the HST is going to hurt Nova Scotians. It's going to drive people to our neighbouring provinces to buy some of the bigger products that they would like to acquire. And so that'll be a great boon for our neighbours in New Brunswick. And I know the minister loves to hear about New Brunswick and how they might benefit from this. But unfortunately, it is the truth. And it creates even more difficulty for our towns and people who live close to the border. Mr. Speaker, there's an awful lot in this bill to talk about the Financial Measures Act, but I think that I've raised some of the concerns that I have and my caucus has, and I know that there'll be an opportunity for further discussion. So with that, I'm going to take my place, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise and speak to second reading of the Financial Measures Act today, Bill number 24.